Log 002. Incident designation. Criticality event. Los Alamos National Laboratory. Date: May 21, 1946. Time of failure: 1520. Mountain Standard Time. Subject: Louis Alexander Slotin. Age: 35. Occupation: physicist, Special Engineering Detachment. This is not a story about carelessness. This is a record of what happens when a human hand becomes the last mechanical safeguard between stability and cascade. The device in question had no official designation. The technicians called it something else. They called it the Demon Core. 6.2 kilograms. Plutonium 239. Weapons grade, Delta phase. Manufactured at Hanford site. Reactor B, intended payload for a third atomic device that was never deployed. By May of 1946, this core had been repurposed. It was now a research tool, an object of academic inquiry. It was also a killer. 4 months prior. August 21st, 1945. Physicist Harry Daghlian had surrounded the same core with tungsten carbide bricks. A criticality experiment. One brick too many. The mass went prompt critical. Daghlian received 510 rems of radiation. He died 25 days later, his tissue liquefying from the inside. The core was cleaned, remachined, returned to service. It had already demonstrated its function. Now, it waited for confirmation. The experiment was simple in design, dangerous in execution. 2 beryllium hemispheres, neutron reflectors. When placed around the plutonium core, they would bounce escaping neutrons back into the mass, increasing the probability of fission. Move them close enough, and the reaction becomes self-sustaining. Critical. The approved method required spacers, shims, precise mechanical separation to prevent accidental closure. Louis Slotin did not use spacers. He used a flathead screwdriver. He inserted the blade between the upper and lower hemispheres, using his thumb to control the gap. Millimeters of steel, millimeters of air. This was the only barrier between a controlled demonstration and an uncontrolled chain reaction. He had done this before, 17 times. By some accounts, colleagues called it tickling the dragon's tail. Enrico Fermi called it something else. He told Slotin directly that if he continued this procedure, he would be dead within a year. Slotin knew. He continued. Omega Site, room 139. 8 personnel present. Slotin stood at the apparatus. Directly behind him, Alvin Graves, Armed Forces Special Engineer. Distance 4 feet. To his left, Private First Class Patrick Cleary. To his right, 2 visiting scientists from the Theoretical Division. 3 others, positioned near the door. None of them were behind shielding. The experiment was a demonstration, a proof of concept. Scheduled duration, 11 minutes. Slotin lowered the top hemisphere. The screwdriver held it suspended. He rotated the blade, adjusting the gap. The Geiger counter began to climb. Tick, 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 tick. He was monitoring the neutron flux, watching the approach to criticality. This was the edge, the boundary condition. He had done this 17 times. His hand was steady. And then, the screwdriver slipped. The top hemisphere dropped. 3 millimeters, perhaps 4. The gap closed. Reflected neutrons achieved geometric efficiency. The reaction became prompt supercritical. In the span of a single neutron generation, 1/100th of a microsecond. The plutonium core began to disassemble itself with energy. The room filled with blue light. The air itself was glowing. Gamma rays and high-energy particles ionized the nitrogen and oxygen molecules, exciting them to fluorescence. The atmosphere became luminous, a cold, spectral blue, radiating from the empty space around the core. And within that glow, Slotin saw another blue, a deeper blue, Cherenkov radiation, generated not in the air, but in the fluid of his own eyes. Particles tearing through the vitreous humor. Faster than light could travel through that medium. A blue that existed only for him. A private transmission of his own destruction. He felt the heat before he processed the light. A wave of infrared across his face and hands. The taste of metal flooded his mouth. Ozone. Ionized copper. Nerves misfiring as gamma rays tore through the neurons in his tongue. The core was now producing 10 to the 16th neutrons per second. 10 quadrillion neutrons per second. He did not freeze. He did not step back. Louis Slotin reached forward, grabbed the upper hemisphere with his bare hand, and knocked it to the floor. The reaction stopped. Elapsed time, approximately 1 second. The dragon had bitten him. Slotin stood upright. He did not collapse. He did not scream. He turned to the others and gave a single instruction. Do not leave. Mark where you are standing. He retrieved a piece of chalk from the table. He moved to each person in the room and drew an outline around their feet. He asked them to remain still, to remember their exact orientation, the angle of their bodies relative to the core. He was creating a dosimetry map. He knew what had happened. He knew what it meant. And he knew that the position of each person in that room would determine whether they would die in days, weeks, or years. Alvin Graves, standing 4 feet behind him, had been partially shielded by Slotin's body. Estimated dose, 400 rads, survivable, severe radiation sickness, but survivable. Patrick Cleary, to the left, 160 rads. He would lose his hair, he would vomit, he would live. The others, farther back, sublethal exposures. And Slotin himself? He did not need a dosimeter to know. He had been less than 1 foot from an unshielded supercritical mass. His left hand had directly touched the beryllium reflector. During the reaction, estimated dose, 2,100 rads. Median lethal dose for a human being is 450 rads. He had received nearly 5 times that amount. There was no ambiguity, no hope of experimental treatment. Louis Slotin had just become a walking corpse. He walked out of the building under his own power. He was driven to the Los Alamos infirmary. He was conscious, alert. He described the incident in technical detail to the attending physician. He provided estimates of dosage for each individual in the room. He requested that his parents be notified, but not yet told the prognosis. He was experiencing nausea, mild disorientation. This was expected. This was the silent period. For the first 24 hours after acute radiation exposure. The body does not yet understand what has been done to it. Symptoms are mild. The victim may feel almost normal, but at the cellular level, the damage is absolute. Ionizing radiation does not burn tissue in a traditional sense. It severs molecular bonds. It shatters the DNA helix in thousands of locations, simultaneously, in cells that are actively dividing: bone marrow, intestinal lining, hair follicles. The destruction is immediate. but the effect is delayed. The cells that are already mature will continue to function for a time, and then, as they reach the end of their lifespan and attempt to divide, they cannot. The body begins to fail in stages. First, the immune system collapses. White blood cell counts drop to 0. Second, the gastrointestinal lining disintegrates. The intestines become unable to absorb nutrients or retain fluid. Third, the vascular system begins to hemorrhage. Capillaries rupture. Internal bleeding becomes uncontrollable. Louis Slotin knew all of this. He had 9 days. Day 3. Hair loss begins. Skin lesions appear on his hands. Day 4. White blood cell count undetectable. Massive blood transfusions initiated, ineffective. Day 5. Blistering across the left hand and forearm. Tissue necrosis. The hand that removed the hemisphere is now blackened, non-viable. Day 6. Intestinal function ceases. He can no longer retain food or water. Weight loss accelerates. Day 7. Internal hemorrhaging. Blood in the urine. Stool. Saliva. His body is liquefying. He remained lucid. He described his symptoms to the medical staff in precise clinical language. He allowed photographs to be taken for research purposes. He understood that his death had value. As data, on the 8th day that his colleague Alvin Graves visited him. Graves had survived his own exposure. He was weak, nauseous, but alive. Slotin looked at him and said, "You'll be okay, but I haven't the faintest chance." It was not self-pity. It was a statement of fact. May 30th, 1946, 11 o'clock, Mountain Standard Time. Louis Alexander Slotin expired due to acute radiation syndrome. Cause of death: total systemic failure secondary to ionizing radiation exposure. He died in his hospital bed, attended by his parents, and a medical team that could do nothing but document the progression. He was 35 years old. His body was placed in a lead-lined coffin and transported to Winnipeg, Canada, for burial. The casket remained sealed. 7 others had been in the room. All survived. Alvin Graves lived until 1965. He died of a heart attack, likely accelerated by his radiation exposure. The demon core was not retired. It was cleaned, remachined, and on July 1st, 1946, 32 days after it killed Louis Slotin, it was loaded into a Mark III Fat Man casing and detonated over Bikini Atoll as part of Operation Crossroads. The core that had claimed 2 lives in a laboratory was finally allowed to fulfill its original purpose. It vaporized instantly in a fireball reaching millions of degrees. The heat of a star, unleashed on Earth. Test designation: shot able. Yield: 23 kilotons. The error was not the screwdriver. The error was the assumption that human reflex could substitute for mechanical interlock. Louis Slotin was not reckless in the colloquial sense. He was not ignorant. He had calculated the risks. He understood neutron multiplication. He had performed the procedure successfully 17 times. But probability does not care about precedent. A screwdriver is not a safety device. A human thumb is not a calibrated instrument, and a critical mass does not forgive. The demon core was not cursed. It was not malicious. It was simply plutonium, obeying the laws of physics. It did what plutonium does when the conditions are met. It split, and in splitting, it killed. After Slotin's death, the procedure was banned. No further hand-stacking experiments, No more screwdrivers, no more dragons to tickle. Remote manipulation became standard. Shielding became mandatory. Protocols were formalized. The era of the cowboy physicist ended in that room. 2 men died so that the rules could be written in something other than theory. Harry Daghlian, Louis Slotin. Their deaths were not heroic. They were instructive. The screwdriver that slipped is now preserved in a museum archive. It is not on display. The chalk marks on the floor were photographed, measured, and then scrubbed away. The room was decontaminated and returned to service, and the work continued. Log 002. Complete. Incident cause: mechanical failure, human error, insufficient safeguard redundancy, failure mode, prompt criticality due to reflector geometry closure, fatalities. 1. Lesson: physics does not negotiate. The demon core is gone, detonated, scattered as radioactive ash across the Pacific. But the principle remains. There will always be a core. There will always be a screwdriver. There will always be a hand that believes it can hold back the cascade. And there will always be a room where someone miscalculates the distance between control and catastrophe. We do not build monuments to these moments. We build better locks. End log